So, hello, my name is John Jaramillo, pastor of New Hope, and these videos that I'm recording are to leave wisdom, to leave experience for my children, and not only for them, but also to anyone who would benefit from the experiences and the wisdom that God has allowed me to acquire throughout the years as being a pastor. So in the first two videos, I talked about how God dealt with my life and how He called me forth and opened doors for me so that I could step into ministry. And I knew that God uh, had a calling in my life back then when the Lord had to remake me new. The story goes that God did have to break me. God had to remake me again brand new. I'd given my life early in the Lord. However, along the way, I had gotten sidetracked. I had pursued my own desires and my own wants. And of course, through the process, because there was disobedience involved, and wherever there's disobedience involved, then there will be discipline, there'll be consequences. And I'm not trying to say that God is out to punish people, but as a result, because He's a father, because He is a father, uh, He tells us that God will, He loves, because He loves the children that He's chosen or anyone that's come to Him, He will discipline them as well. So again, He's just being a good father, and that's what God is. God is a good father, and everything He does is to help us to make us better. The the key ingredient here is to be transformed, to obey. When we obey, when we are willing to surrender and let the Lord have His way in our lives, then we do see a transformation happen and things begin to go upward instead of lateral or downward again. And I've seen people that, God deals with them, God puts them through a process, but they still hold on to their mentality. They still hold on to ways of thinking or emotions in their heart, in their soul, of how they feel about other people or how they feel about the situation. And they try to reason and put God into their schema or into their mindset, into their frame of thinking, and they end up back again where they started. And they don't go forward, they don't progress because they're still holding on to reason. They feel that God should be the way that they've read about God or they think about how God should be. And the truth is that the Lord tells us in the prophet Isaiah that His ways are not our ways and that His thoughts are not our thoughts. And so He says that they're so much higher, but He never tells us that we cannot reach them. We can find His ways, we can find His thoughts, what He's thinking about, by going lower, by going deeper into Him, surrendering our lives to Him, and we'll be able to connect with the Lord and we'll be able to understand, okay, what is the plan that God has for our lives. So this is video 3, and video 1, I talked about how the Lord had called me into ministry, and video 2, I talked about how the Lord had opened a door for me to become an ordained minister. Now, all of this has happened since I was with an organization called the Apostolic Assembly of the Faith in Christ Jesus. And of course, by me saying that, that kind of gives you a hint that we're no longer with the organization. But that'll come later on in some videos. So then it happens. I remember being at home, my wife and I, and we get a call. I receive a phone call, and it's our bishop, the bishop supervisor for our district, which of course at that time covered all the way from Corpus Christi, Alice, Laredo, and all the cities here. So he was a supervisor of all the churches, and I was the assistant pastor in the church of Weslaco with Pastor Herman Mendez, my pastor, and so I was his assistant. And I received a call, and it was our bishop, and he was asking me and my wife to pray and to talk about being willing to accept a pastoral position in one of the churches that was going to become vacant in the pastoral leadership of that church. Um, and so that was the church of San Benito. And so I talked to my wife, we shared, uh, and my bishop had told me that he had already spoken with my pastor. So he knew about what was going on. And to be honest with you, I mean, it was a prayer because I did aspire to one day become a pastor. I felt and believed that the calling of God was upon my life for that. And but I never imagined that it would be in one of the churches that I had seldom visited. I had been there at San Benito, and but I never imagined that it would be there. I never imagined God would call me to a place such like San Benito. Um, San Benito, from the times that we were there, I knew the pastor who was there. He had been there for a good long time, and it was a, how can I tell you? It was, as far as the ambience is concerned, it was a dark church. Not the spirit of it, but the actual ambience of it. For some reason, they had decided to switch out the regular lighting in a building, and they added some chandeliers to it or some ceiling fans to it, and so that just made the ambience of the church very dark, if you will. I mean, you would walk in there, and it was kind of like going from day outside into the night. And that's the church that the Lord called me to pastor the church of San Benito. I remember being there the Sunday that we were going to be installed as a pastor, um, and and I remember that the bishop and his board were there, and the pastor was there, and the church was full. It was full, um, and that was the day that the Lord installed my wife and I as pastors of the church. So that was on a Sunday, and our first service was going to be um, on a Wednesday. That was a Wednesday that was coming up, and our first service actually was going to be on the day of the eve of the new year that was about to come in. That was going into 2002, if you will. So the service that we had to install me into a pastoral role was the last Sunday of 2001, and then when we came on Wednesday, my wife and I, there were only there were three families that showed up that day. Only that was it, and it was the local minister who was there, and his family. There was an elderly lady who was there, Sister Micaela, and her daughter. And then there was another family also that was there, and that other family, the husband called me, and he wanted to speak with me, and we went outside to the front of the church, and he just mentioned to me that they were also planning to leave to Harlingen. The whole congregation, all of them, just they followed the other pastor, and again they left with him, and so that Wednesday there was only my wife and I, and we had Jacob and Shekinah, and it was the ministers, him and his family, and Sister Micaela and her daughter, and that was it. That's all we had. And so we had our first service. We celebrated the Lord, and God blessed us, and that's how ministry began. We began ministering in San Benito. So I was in my 30s when that happened, serving the Lord, and I don't know, maybe if I was maybe my actually 30, or going into the 30s, but I remember it was a very challenging time. It was a time that it made me cry. It made me cry a lot, um, because there really weren't too many members left. Everybody had gone to join the other pastor when he had been moved, and but my family and I, my wife and I, we went to the Lord in prayer, and at the same time, I think the following Sunday, or maybe in 2 Sundays after, we had my father-in-law and my mother-in-law and all their family. They came to join us. They were originally from Sebastian, Texas, and they moved over to Weslaco, Texas, where they have their home. And then they had mentioned to us that they had made a decision to come and be a part with us and help us with the work there in San Benito. And that's how the journey begins, as being a pastor there in San Benito. And we began to work. And slowly, some of the other members who I guess who maybe had been thinking or deciding if they were going to leave, some of them finally decided not to. And we had Sister Helen, if you will. She started to attend services, and then we had another family that also started to attend. And then slowly, we began to just visit and call on the people that had been part of that church, and they began to join us. And what I remember, one of the experiences about that church is, I remember time began to pass, and we were a small group, and honestly, I didn't like it. I didn't like to be known as a small church. I didn't like to be called a small church. But that's what we were. We were a small church. I remember one day that I went to the church and I poured out my heart. And I told God to help us. I told the Lord, you need to help me, because this is your church, and you have called us to preach the gospel. You've called us to share the good news with people. And I told the Lord, I don't know how to do it. I knew what needed to be done as far as give Bible studies and, help people that have already made a decision for Jesus, and then they would be baptized. But as far as evangelism, I had done that in my local church. I had done that at the sector level and at the district level. We had done some evangelism. But now I was a pastor at a church, and slowly we began to do activities. One of the first activities that we did was there was a pavilion downtown, and we decided to do a prayer. And it was, I think it was around the celebration of, I think it was the celebration or the anniversary of 9/11. And I remember being out there. We were out there, and I remember we had taken the pulpit of the church, a small pulpit of the church, and we were out there preaching and what have you. We had that memorial service there at the pavilion. And but then thereafter, the Lord just began to open heaven. Heaven began to open there in San Benito, and things began to change, because people then began to come. People started to congregate there. And it was also the time that I had some pastor friends that I began to connect and draw close to. One of them was introducing a vision that he had received from Mexico, which was not an original vision. It was a vision that later on I heard that it came from Apostle Cash Luna in Guatemala at Casa de Dios. And so we began to work with that. We didn't really understand the entirety of the vision. There were questions that I had, but the little thing that I knew, I began to work and I began to implement. And as we were growing as a church, people then began to get baptized also there at the church. And the Lord just began to move in that little church. And so this is, I'm going to break this up into another segment, another video, but that's how I began my pastoral in the Church of San Benito. And then the next video that I'm going to share that connects with this particular video is continuing the ministry there in San Benito. God bless you. I love you in the Lord. My name is Apostle John Jaramillo.